Be honest for a second. How many times has your computer completely ruined your day? You sit down to do something simple. Maybe it's a school assignment, maybe you're working, maybe you're just browsing the internet. And suddenly, boom, your system freezes. Or worse, it crashes into that dreaded blue screen. No warning, no explanation, just gone. And then there are the updates. You didn't ask for them, you didn't schedule them. But somehow, Microsoft Windows decides now is the perfect time to restart your entire machine while you're in the middle of something important. It doesn't care if you're working, studying, or presenting something, it just takes over. Then comes the upgrade problem. A new version of Windows drops, and suddenly your perfectly fine computer is now not compatible. So now you're stuck in this awkward loop. Either stay behind on outdated software or spend hundreds on a new machine you didn't even want. And we haven't even talked about the rest yet. Background tracking, telemetry data being collected quietly, ads showing up in places they shouldn't, and system bloat that slows everything down over time. It starts to feel less like your computer and more like something you're just borrowing. At some point, most people hit the same thought. There has to be something better than this. That's exactly where this story really begins. Because for years, a lot of users, especially people who only need their computer for basic everyday tasks, have been quietly switching away from that frustration and discovering something different, something lighter, faster, more in control. And that's where Linux enters the picture, not as a complicated developer tool, not as something only experts use, but as a real practical alternative for normal users who are simply tired of fighting their own computer every day. In this video, we're going to go step by step through what that actually looks like, from the moment you decide to change everything, to wiping your system clean and installing a fresh new operating system. But before we get into any technical steps, you need to understand what you're actually switching to and why it might completely change how you use your computer forever. So before we touch any installation steps or start wiping anything, it's important to understand what you're actually moving toward, because switching your operating system isn't just a technical decision, it's a mindset shift. The alternative here is Linux, and unlike traditional commercial systems, it doesn't come from a single company controlling every update, feature, or restriction. Instead, it's built by a global community of developers who constantly improve it, modify it, and adapt it for different types of users. That's where things get interesting. Linux isn't just one single system. It exists in many different versions called distributions. Think of them like different styles of the same foundation. Some are minimal and fast. Others are designed to look familiar, and some are built for advanced users who want total control. For beginners, one of the most recommended options is Linux Mint. The reason is simple. It feels familiar. The layout, the menus, the general workflow. It's designed so that someone coming from Windows doesn't feel completely lost on day one. And that's important because most people watching this aren't trying to become system administrators. They just want their computer to work. Open a browser, check emails, maybe write documents, stream videos, and not deal with constant interruptions. Now here's where Linux starts to stand out. It doesn't push forced restarts in the same aggressive way. It doesn't bombard you with ads inside the system. And it doesn't quietly run unnecessary background services that slow everything down over time. Instead, it tends to stay out of your way, giving you more control over what runs and when. It's also generally lighter on hardware. That means older computers that struggle with modern Windows versions can often run Linux much more smoothly, even if they're years old. But here's the key point. This isn't about declaring one system good and the other bad. It's about choosing what fits your needs better. If you're someone who values simplicity, stability, and control, Linux might feel like a breath of fresh air. And now that you understand what it is and why people switch, the next step is where things become practical, getting everything ready so you can actually install it. We're going to start with the download process. And this is where your transition really begins. Now that you understand what Linux is and why people switch to it, it's time to actually prepare everything you'll need to install it. This part is not difficult, but it does require attention because you're setting up the tool that will replace your current system. First, you need to download the operating system itself. In this case, we're going with Linux Mint because it's one of the most beginner-friendly options available and closely resembles a traditional desktop setup. You start by visiting the official download page and selecting the version that fits most normal users. Usually, that means the standard desktop edition. Once you click download, your system will begin downloading a file called an ISO. Think of this as a complete digital copy of the operating system. Now here's where things get important. That ISO file alone doesn't do anything unless it's placed onto a bootable device. This is where a USB flash drive comes in. You'll need at least an 8 GB drive, though 16 GB is safer and more reliable. To turn that USB into an installation tool, you'll use a program like Rufus. This tool takes the Linux ISO file and writes it properly onto your flash drive so your computer can boot from it. Once you open Rufus, the process is straightforward. Select your USB drive, choose the downloaded Linux ISO file, start the writing process. But here's something important to understand. This step will completely erase everything on that USB drive. So anything stored there will be deleted permanently. After you confirm and start the process, the tool begins creating your bootable installer. It may take a few minutes depending on your system, but once it finishes, you'll have a fully working Linux installation drive. At this point, you haven't touched your main computer system yet. Windows is still completely intact. Nothing has changed. All you've done so far is prepare the key that will unlock the next stage. And that next stage is where things get real, booting your computer from the USB and actually stepping into Linux for the first time. Now that your bootable USB is ready, it's time for the moment where everything actually begins. This is the point where your computer stops behaving like a normal Windows machine and instead boots into something completely different. You plug in the USB drive, restart your computer, and enter the boot menu. This can usually be done by pressing a key like F12, F9, ESC, or sometimes a manufacturer-specific key right after powering on. From there, you'll see a list of boot options. One of them will be your USB device. You select it, and instead of loading your usual system, the computer starts loading Linux Mint directly from the flash drive. Now here's something important. Now, this is not installation yet. What you're seeing is a live environment. That means the system is running temporarily from the USB without changing anything on your hard drive. Your existing Windows system is still untouched in the background. Once it loads, you'll notice something surprising, a familiar-looking desktop. There are icons, a taskbar, a menu, and file folders that feel very similar to what you're used to. This is intentional. Linux Mint is designed so beginners don't feel lost when they first arrive. At this stage, you can actually explore everything freely. Open the browser, test the settings, check how files are organized, and get a feel for how the system behaves. Nothing you do here is permanent, and so it's essentially a safe test drive. If the system feels too slow, that's usually because it's running from a USB drive, not your actual storage. Once installed, performance improves significantly. This step is important psychologically as well. It removes uncertainty. Instead of blindly installing a new operating system, you get to interact with it first and decide if it feels right. And if you like what you see, the next step is the big one, the actual installation process, where Linux moves from the USB onto your hard drive and becomes your main system. That's where things become permanent. This is the point where everything becomes real. Up until now, nothing has been permanent. You've only been testing. But now you're moving into the actual installation process, where your system will be changed for good. Inside the live environment of Linux Mint, you'll see an option that says Install Linux Mint. When you click it, the setup process begins. The installer will guide you step by step. First, you'll choose your language and keyboard layout. Then you'll connect to the internet if you haven't already. These steps are simple and mostly self-explanatory, but now comes the most important decision in the entire process. You'll be asked how you want to install the system. One option is to install Linux alongside another operating system, but in this case, we're focusing on a full switch. So the option that matters is to erase the disk and install Linux. This is the moment where your existing system is removed. Everything on the drive, files, programs, settings, and yes, even Windows, will be deleted and replaced with Linux. There's no undo button after this step. That's why it's important to be absolutely sure before continuing. Once you confirm, the installer begins copying system files, setting up partitions, and configuring the system structure. You'll also be asked to create a username and password. This will become your main login for the new system. During installation, you'll usually see a slideshow explaining features like software availability, security, customization, and updates. While this runs, the system is quietly building your new operating environment in the background. After a short wait, the installation completes, and you'll be prompted to restart your computer. When it boots back up, you remove the USB drive, and at that moment, everything changes. Your computer no longer loads Windows. Instead, it loads a completely new system, clean, fresh, and fully controlled by you. And that leads directly into the final stage, what it actually feels like to use Linux as your everyday system. Once your computer restarts after installation, everything feels slightly unfamiliar, but in a good way. Instead of loading Windows, your system now boots directly into Linux Mint, and the first thing you'll usually see is a welcome screen guiding you through basic setup options. This is where you start shaping the system to fit your personal use. You'll be offered things like driver checks, system updates, and basic configuration tools. These are important because they help your computer recognize your hardware properly and ensure everything runs smoothly from the start. Next, you'll notice something that stands out immediately. The update system is centralized and simple. Instead of multiple hidden processes running in the background, updates are clearly listed in one place, and you decide when to apply them. Then comes one of the most noticeable differences. software installation. Instead of searching random websites for installers, you use a built-in software manager. It works like an app store where you can search, install, and remove applications safely in just a few clicks. At this point, many users start customizing their desktop, changing wallpapers, themes, and layouts. The system is flexible enough that it can feel completely personal within minutes. Performance is another area where users often notice a difference. Because Linux is generally lighter than traditional Windows setups, even older machines can feel faster and more responsive. You'll also find that daily tasks, like browsing, streaming videos, managing files, and working with documents, run without interruption. There are no forced restarts, no surprise pop-ups, and far less background clutter. Of course, no system is perfect. Some Windows programs may not run natively, though alternatives or compatibility tools sometimes solve that problem. But for many users, the trade-off is worth it. In the end, switching to Linux isn't just about changing software, it's about changing how much control you have over your own machine. And once you experience that difference, it becomes clear why so many people decide not to go back.